Okay, so on Wednesday, April 8th, I posted the handout that you see here. Is this the one I posted? No. Alright, so this is the handout I posted. The other one I'll post for today. Give you guys an opportunity to work through on your own. But this is the one I posted on Wednesday. And so let's talk through it. Cutting Edge Inc. issues $500,000 of bonds that mature in 15 years. These bonds pay interest semi-annually at the rate of 10%. Market rate of similar bonds is 12%. All right. So the first requirement: what is the amount of each semi-annual interest payment? All right. Okay, so what that looks like is the face amount times the interest rate. Now, we want to be sure we grab the right interest rate. In this instance, we're going to grab the contract rate, which is a 10% rate. And then they're semi-annual, as all bonds will be given to work with will be. So we'll take 6/12 for, since the interest compounds twice a year. And we'll just figure this out. Okay, so that's the answer to the first question. Semi-annual interest payment. That means Cutting Edge Inc. is going to have to write checks to the bondholders totaling $25,000 twice a year. Right. So if the bonds were issued on January 1st, then interest would be paid June 30th and December 31st. All right. What is the price these bonds will sell for? All right. So we want to think of the cash flows. All right. You have your maturity value. And your semi-annual interest payment of $25,000. All right, now keep in mind the maturity value is what the bondholders are going to get at the end of 15 years. And the $25,000 is an annuity that they'll get every 6 months for the next 15 years. All right. And since this is, let me move these over. Didn't need it that big. All right. Okay. So the maturity value, when we're pricing bonds, we're going to price the present value of the maturity value And so from our table, we're going to look at table B1. To do that, and we're going to pull a factor for, well, it's 15 years, but it's semi-annual. All right. And it's 10%, but it's also semi-annual. So we're going to look at our table B1. Now the market rate, when you're pricing bonds, you always use the market rate. So the market rate is 12%. We see that here. All right. But we're going to chop that in half. So we're going to look at 6%. And the reason we chop it in half is because they're semi-annual. All right. So chop the interest rate in half and double the number of periods. So 15 years. We're going to look for 30 periods because that's the number of interest compounding periods. And what we get is 0.1741. Right? And that's your factor. All right. We'll do the same for the interest annuity, which comes from table B3. But we'll use the same factors. So 6, and for the same reason. So 6% for 30 periods. Price, since the contract rate was lower than the market rate, we should expect that these would sell for a discount. So that checks because the amount is less than $500,000, the $500,000 face amount. Okay. As a point here, just to point out, if when you're doing this, you get something very, very close to the face amount, in this case $500,000, stop right there, because that means that you picked the wrong rate, right? If I had picked the contract rate and plugged in the factors for 10%, I'm going to get something very close to the contract rate, and something very close to the par amount. And I'll actually demonstrate that in just a moment. Well, no time like the present. Actually, let me demonstrate that because that's a common mistake that I see. So let me just plug in the factors for 5%, which would be half of the 10 contract rate for 30 periods. So we get 0.2314. And for the interest annuity, we have 0.153725. All right. And so what we get is $500,000 with, or I should say $500,012.50. Now that's very, very close to the face amount, right? And the reason for that is because we used the wrong interest rate. That the $12.50 is actually rounding error. Anytime you use the tables, there is some rounding error because they're only accurate to 4 decimal places. And over 15 years, that's for all intents and purposes, it's the same number. All right? So be cognizant of that. When you're asked to price bonds, if you get something very close to the face amount, you've used the wrong interest rate. All right? So let me back this back out. Okay. So the answer here, 431,170. All right. Let's continue with requirement 3. All right. Prepare the journal entry to record the issuance of these bonds. All right. So cash, well, we know how much cash the sale of the bonds raised because we computed it. All right. Bonds payable, and they go on the books at the maturity value. And so we will need a plug. Let's try that again. All right, so in this case, the plug is 68,830, and we know these bonds sold for less than the face amount, so that's what we'll refer to as the discount on bonds payable. All right, so that's all 3 requires. All right, now requirement 4, I haven't demonstrated yet, so I'll do it here. And so if you got through that far from April 8th lecture, you're in great shape. If not, that's okay. There's still plenty of time. But let's talk about the 4th requirement. All right. So this discount on bonds payable, it represents, in this case, it would be a contra liability account. So if you remember how we presented plant, property, and equipment net of depreciation, or accounts receivable net of the allowance for doubtful accounts, that's how this would be presented. So bonds payable shows up in the liability section of the balance sheet, and we would subtract out the discount on bonds payable and show them net. All right. So the idea, though, with the discount is that it's amortized away, and by the time the bonds mature, the discount account is going to have a 0 balance. All right. So for these particular bonds, there are 30 semi-annual payments because they're 15-year bonds, 2 payments per year. And so for our purposes, what we're going to do is compute the discount amortized with each interest payment. And what we're going to do is take the $68,830 and divide by the number of interest payments over the bond's life. So since these are 15-year bonds, 30 payments will divide by 30. All right, $2,294.33. Okay. So with each interest payment, the company is going to pay some cash. So we'll credit that. And that amount we've already computed. All right. There's going to be a bond interest expense. Which is going to be our plug. All right. Now, the way to think about the discount is we put it on the books with a debit. And so it comes off with 30 equal credits, all right, in the amount we just calculated. All right. So your bond interest expense is the plug. All right. The bond interest expense is actually greater than the amount of checks sent to bondholders. And effectively what this does is even though the bonds have a contract rate of 10%, the actual cost of issuing the bonds to Cutting Edge is 12%. And that's what we've done here. So this $27,294.33 is the actual expense of borrowing, the 12%, right? Okay, so that's how we would do this. This entry would be made every 6 months for 15 years until the bonds have in fact matured and they're paid off. All right, so okay, so that's how we get through that handout, and that's all for now.